If you've ever wondered if type 1 diabetics can keep blood sugar stable through an endurance based exercise or activity, today's episode is going to be filled to the brim with golden nuggets for you. I actually got a chance to interview one of my clients, Rachel, about her recent experience where she was able to keep 100% time in range for an endurance based sport. The sport itself is going to shock you as it did me. It's really cool, but also really unique. But during this interview that I had with her, I got a chance to speak about strategies. We walked through step by step what I showed her in a single phone call that changed her life dramatically and enabled her to completely control her blood sugars through this insane sport. So, if you've ever wondered, can I keep my blood sugars stable through exercise or activity or playtime? This episode is going to be the one for you. I cannot wait to get into it because she shared some really insightful tips and insider thoughts and strategies that I think you might really enjoy. So, without any further ado, let's get into the interview. Well, thanks so much, Rachel, for hopping in with us today, sharing your story. I am thrilled that we get to talk about this. I would love for just everybody who's watching, listening, to get a little bit of an idea of who you are before we get into the details of the sports and the blood sugars. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your diagnosis or how long you've been diabetic, what kind of tech you use, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I was diagnosed 1 week before my 12th birthday, and I'm now 36, so you can do the math. When I was diagnosed, I was a competitive gymnast, and my first symptoms was just like extreme thirst. And then my parents noticed that my vision had changed because I could no longer see the kitchen clock from the counter.
Wow.
And my parents, luckily, they're both biology background. And so my mom immediately was like, I'm going to take her to the pediatrician. So that was kind of the diagnosis. I was pretty lucky in that I didn't get super ill. I was just extremely thirsty. That was like my main symptom. So I kind of went to the hospital feeling fine and then being like, wait a minute, what is this? Like
Wow.
shots? Sort of learning that whole thing. So that was kind of where it started. And then I would say 2 or 3 years in, I started on a pump. But I was doing multiple daily injections to start. And then now today I'm using the Dexcom and the T-Slim together.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Okay, so from shots to pump and all the communicating technology now working for you.
So much
And
better.
oh yeah, it's such a difference, right? Especially, I don't know if you started on syringes and vials like I did, but it's like, oh wow, even the pens were a big difference to me. It was like, that's so
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, I mean, like I know we had our conversation, I think it was even just a couple weeks ago. What was like the initial reason that you wanted to reach out and see if there was something we could help with? What were you going through?
Yeah. So I think I've been an athlete my entire life. But this is by far sort of the more challenging sport that I've done just from the diabetes control aspect. Um, and because there are no breaks in it, I haven't really done a long endurance sport. And so I'm doing outrigger canoe now, and the races are 10 to 12 miles long. And so I felt like I needed a lot more tailored approach. And I was at a point I was ready to be more intentional about my planning. And I think I've always come at diabetes from this approach of like, I can do anything, but
Mhm.
not necessarily like, and I can control how the outcome is going to be. It's been a little more reactive. And so I just
Uh,
wanted the diabetes to not make me feel bad. And I felt like this sport was also a little higher risk, which probably cued the conversation because I'll be out in the middle of the ocean and getting a real serious low out there could have bad consequences.
yeah, no kidding. So, and I might have missed it, but did you mention the actual sport yet? I don't want to spoil it.
Oh, outrigger canoe. Yeah.
Fantastic,
I'm
because
repping my team here.
I see that. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
A little bit more of a rare occurrence with this sport. It's not as mainstream, I guess you could say. And you know, for me in college, I was on the crew team, so rowing, but I went backwards and you go forward, right? In
Correct.
the
And I
boat.
was also on the crew team in college.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness, I love it.
yeah, so I think the difference is that a race and crew, I mean, practices are long, but you have
Mhm.
breaks. And in crew, the
Right.
race is what, like 7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah,
And
it's just like 2 miles.
without
And you're
rigor,
done.
you can be out there like a mile, like an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Jeez.
That
So,
was the big difference for me is like I can't use my hands and
right.
I can't stop. And that's where like our brainstorming came in.
Hmm. I remember that. And yeah, and our initial conversation was like, okay, we can help. Let's make a plan because at that point, I think your race was like a week away. And you're like, I need to fix everything in a week. Let's just jump in. I was like, all right, awesome, let's go. And we had I think it was our hour-long phone call of just like hit the ground running. What strategies can we implement? So let's walk through that a little bit about like what worked, what didn't, what were the thoughts going into race day. So before we had our conversation, what were your initial worries about race day? You mentioned going low in the middle of the ocean. Obviously, it's a big deal. What were you concerned about blood sugar wise?
I was concerned about having any insulin on board and
Mm,
going low because I had repeatedly gone low during practice. So I knew that was a real risk. Um, I was concerned about visibility of not knowing or being able to see where the blood sugars were at.
hmm.
Um, I think those were pretty much the two big things. And just wanting to have more of an idea of where it was going to go predictably. And so I think talking about what to do the morning of, what to eat, how to dose, and then even down to like what settings to put my pump on
Hmm.
throughout the race, whether to use control IQ or not, all those things were factors.
Absolutely. So, if I remember correctly, I think our initial conversation was that you would go low during, but then afterwards, sometimes you would go high. And it was just this roller coaster of effects. Is that true?
Yes, yes. I
Okay.
would just turn on exercise mode half an hour before the workout, um, crash low during practice, and then as soon as I got off the water without eating anything, it would just start to go right up. So that was kind of my pattern.
Well, and I love that you mentioned this. I mean, I used to experience it. I've had a ton of clients who try these all fancy algorithms with Omnipod and Medtronic and Tandem, and we are told that it's going to fix everything. Oh, just turn exercise mode on and you can exercise freely. It's
Yeah.
like kind of not really, like it helps, but it doesn't just fix everything. And I have seen that pattern a lot where it's a drop during and then a spike after, and there's a whole reason for that. But um, I mean, with our conversation, I know we covered insulin on board, meal timing, time windows, the effects of the race, different ways to fuel. What from that conversation that you and I had stood out as like, oh, I got to do that. That's going to be the thing.
A lot of things, but I think one of the big ones was not under bolusing for my morning meal.
Mm,
So that I would not need to correct 2 hours before the race. So that any correction I would do pre-race would be a food correction, not an insulin correction. That gave me huge peace of mind. So the race was at 10 a.m. We were starting backwards. And we talked about how if I ate at 6 and I took a bolus, that would pretty much be out of my system by the 10 o'clock race. And
mm,
so I did that. Like I took the full amount of insulin, which would have made me nervous if we not talked about it. And then I checked in at 2 hours prior to the race and I was right at like 107 and it was dropping a little bit. So, and even we just talked about like what to eat then.
hmm.
And you had recommended the RX bar, which I thought was a good suggestion. Just like simple, did not make me feel bad. So I just kind of dosed little bits of that until I felt like I was in the range that I wanted to be. So I think that was like kind of one of the number one tips that helped set me up not to have too much insulin on board.
Mm. So starting off strong allowed you to have that peace of mind going into the race then.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I
I
didn't
think,
want to be coming down from a high because
right.
anytime I'm coming down from a high and start exercising, I crash really hard.
Absolutely. It happened to me like 2 days ago. We all make mistakes and I just blanked. I forgot about it. I was like, oh no, everybody hold on. We're
Yeah.
plummeting.
It
So
feels so bad and then you lose your power. And
yeah.
I did not want to do that to my teammates in the boat. Um, I think the other thing you mentioned to me was to lower, if I'm going to lower a basal rate, doing it at least 45 minutes before.
Hmm.
So I actually set my alarm on my phone for 45 minutes before the race. And then I turned off Control IQ and I ended up doing a 70% basal rate for like 3 hours.
Oh,
And
right on.
I guess it was a lucky guess because that worked for me. Um, and then it could just go back to normal. And had I not eaten things right after the race, I don't think it would have gone high.
Oh, gotcha. So the post-race meal might have led to a
I
spike.
might have lost my concentration a little bit post race, but that will be
We'll never
improved
know.
upon this weekend.
But you made it through the race. And how long was the race actually, like time-wise?
We'd actually have the stats here. I think it
Oh,
was an hour 31 minutes.
wow.
It was an hour 31 minutes and 54 seconds.
Of constant activity
Mhm.
without any lows?
So I did not get low, but I was monitoring my blood sugar. And when I started seeing myself trending down in the low 100s, I
Yeah.
took a couple sips of my electrolyte mix. And I actually did that twice. So what was interesting was I saw it going down. I drank maybe, I don't know, 15 carbs worth.
Hmm.
Well, we have to talk about that too.
Oh, let's
Okay.
do it.
We figured out um, knowing what to put in my Camelback for sugar. I had planned on using juice until we talked, and then you mentioned
Hmm.
using electrolytes, and it was way better because normally when I'm drinking juice in practice, I get really sticky and like immediately thirsty.
Right.
But then I wanted to know like how am I going to know out of my Camelback how many carbs I'm getting from each sip? So per your suggestion, I ended up drinking a normal sip out of the Camelback and like spitting it into a measuring cup, calculating how many ounces that was versus how much I had in the Camelback. So I knew exactly how much I was getting in each sip.
I love it.
So
See,
I
this
did
is
have to drink twice. I think I consumed about 30 carbs and it flattened out and it stayed perfectly flat from there. So it was like perfectly matching burn rate with the carb intake and it just flattened out. It was really cool.
I love that. And this is like the nuanced stuff that I love that you brought it up. I forgot that we even talked about that. Is like who could think about drinking fluid but not swallowing it, spitting it out, and not just into the sink, but into a measuring cup. So you know how much fluid you
Yeah.
took in and reverse engineer that to find the carbs, which of course then you are trying to match with the burn rate, as you mentioned. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. So I mean, kudos to you for implementing everything we talked about, because I know I talked fast and we covered a lot of ground on
We
that
did.
simple phone
I
call.
took notes and like I followed the assignment and it totally worked. Yeah,
And what was that?
it totally worked. Like
Oh, love it.
just I think I've never been so intentional about planning for anything diabetes wise. Like I
Right.
plan for every other aspect athletically, but to have the same level of planning going into the diabetes was new for me. And it was like a huge peace of mind, to be honest. Like just knowing that I had a plan. And before the race, people were offering me food here and there. I was just like, nope, I know exactly what I'm eating and when. Don't give me anything.
Yep.
Like
I
knowing
love
that
that.
was really great.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my whole life, I've loved taking free samples, but on race day, that's the one time where I'm like, don't bother me. I know what my calculations are. We're not touching free snacks.
Yep.
You know, as long as the
100%.
free samples at the tents and everything, and you're like,
Yes.
nope, I've got my calculation done. I'm all
That's
set.
exactly what it is. Yeah. No, nothing can change the variables. Like, don't even take a sip of my coffee because I have the right amount of creamer in there.
Yeah, exactly. Can I have some? No, no sharing.
Oh, do not dilute this.
Oh my goodness. So an hour and a half ride, and you said no lows, but 100% time and range for the race itself?
I started at 173, which is technically out of range, but I did that on purpose. And then I ended the race at 99.
Oh,
So,
173 is the highest you went?
mhm.
Oh, so technically, and I don't know what measuring you use, but ADA defines time and range as 70 to 180. So
Oh, sweet.
technically, you were
Oh
100% time and range.
my gosh. Well, okay, great. I mean, my range on my CGM is tighter. So
Oh yes, of
it's
course. So we
like out
can
of my
definitely
gray
cover that.
bar, but that's good to know that.
Look at you. No, I can totally relate. We aim for tighter control than 180, obviously. But yeah, technically, as far as like the doctor's office would measure it, that's 100% time in range for your race. So
Nice.
congrats. That's
Thank
huge.
you. It's really
Wow.
exciting.
And I wanted to jump back to the breakfast plan we talked about with the time windows, digestion corrections, and all that. So just to kind of make sure everybody else understands what we're talking about, because you were
Mhm.
like, make sure I take at least enough insulin because I want to go low and correcting highs. So if you are comfortable with it, kind of walk us through why it was important to take that full dose for breakfast and not to pull back. Because some
Yeah.
people are probably thinking, well, wouldn't you want to be a little bit high before a race? So see if you can kind of walk us through that.
Okay. See if I can explain it. So I wanted to have a little bit of carbs for fuel. I didn't want to have a protein only breakfast. So I ended up having a yogurt and I had toast with like Canadian bacon and cheese, and then my coffee. So I counted accurately for all of it, and just put it into my pump as I normally would and covered the full amount instead of, sometimes if you're about to exercise, you will like under bolus a little bit. I
Hmm.
think because I knew that I had 4 hours before the race, I knew that if I got a low, I would have time to correct that. So I thought that it would be better. Well, you told me it would be better to like have enough insulin on board to cover all the food.
Hmm.
And then you mentioned that 2 hours before your race is kind of your like golden time to say, like, where am I at? Is this good? If I'm going to make a correction, I'm going to make it now. And so at that 2 hour point, I think the worst scenario would be needing to take insulin because then that would affect me in the race and be on board and adding a variable that I didn't want. So at the 2 hour pre-race mark, I wanted the correction to be food, if anything. Does that explain it better?
You nailed it. I'm smiling on the inside the whole time. Like this is the whole goal is to teach someone something so well that they can teach it back, right? Because that means you actually understand it, which means you can duplicate it at the next race, which is perfect. So yeah, the big idea behind it, as you mentioned, is it's so much easier to correct a low or a dropping blood sugar because with sugar, you eat it, you're back in range. With insulin, if you were to go high, that insulin stays on board for like 3, 4, 5 hours, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, a perfect explanation. And it sounds like it worked out great. You mentioned 107, kind of cruising down a little bit, a little snack with an RX bar, perfect back in range. So, uh,
Mhm.
so good. And actually, I know we've had our conversation previously about other races or practices actually that didn't go that smoothly. Can you kind of
Mhm.
compare and contrast what those experiences were like and how it was different during the race as far as athletic performance goes and peace of mind?
Yeah, I think I had been trying all sorts of tactics on my own to try and stay in range during a practice. Often the practices are also in the evening, which I find a lot more challenging. So there's
Hmm.
more going on all day. Um, but I had tried turning on exercise mode earlier, eating something and starting a little bit higher before practice. Um, and then anytime I'm above 200, I'm not feeling great out there on the water. So I would either like start too high because I knew that I was going to drop that many points that I would end up eating something. So either like overcompensating by starting too high, or I wouldn't have bolused enough and I would be like kind of doing small boluses like leading up to a practice. And then about, I guess, looking back, it was like an hour into practice, I was hitting the 60s or the 50s each
Hmm.
practice. And then I was able to recover it in practice because we would stop and I would carry my juice with me in my dry bag out there and drink that. Um, but just sort of either in the high range or in the low range wasn't feeling ideal. And it would just kind of distract from all the other things I'm trying to focus on, which is technique and matching up with my teammates and keeping my power up, all of those things. So I think the difference was just not not being worried about it in the race or not being distracted by it. I was paying attention to it. And so it was like maybe minorly distracting, but not in a distracting, like physical way, just sort of like
Mm.
trying to keep an eye on it.
Right.
But yeah, I hope that it will get better in practice now because I've finally found a way to mount my phone to see my blood sugar while I'm practicing because that has been like my biggest challenge.
Hmm.
Um, so I actually just bought this thing. I tried it yesterday for the first time, and I think it's going to fix everything. I got this thing called Tentacle,
Oh, I love it.
and so I'm literally like sticking this to the boat, like right in front of me, because
Yeah.
there's nothing to mount to. Like that's the only space that I have.
Mm.
Um, there's nothing to clamp to. I can't see my wrist because of where my arms are. I tried something on my leg and it moved too much. Last race, I put it down by my feet, but in certain races, we have to wear a spray skirt. And so then, like,
Right.
I can't see my feet. So, anyway, that's been an ongoing challenge, which hopefully this solves.
Love that. Yeah, and that's the other side of it too, right? Like you were able to master the blood sugars, but then there's seeing the blood sugars that you also have to do. A lot of things to consider with type 1, right? I actually just bought a bike mount today for my iPhone for the triathlon. So, yeah, that's going to be helpful. It's actually seeing the blood sugars, not just having to rely on calculations. But love that you're able to piece those things together and have your numbers to look at to confirm that the choices made and calculations completed were in fact correct. Uh, so race day itself, I mean, staying in range, did that affect your athletic performance, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I was surprised how good I felt at the end of the race.
Hmm.
And I think it's a combination of good blood sugar and like level of training. Our
Right.
coaches probably push us harder on a Saturday practice. And so if we're going 18 miles on a Saturday practice and the race is 10, then it feels like,
Mhm.
oh, that wasn't that bad.
Right.
So yeah, it's like preparing for the diabetes the same way. Like if you're prepared for the worst case scenario and everything kind of goes according to plan, you feel pretty good.
Absolutely. I love that. And actually, I wanted to ask you as well. You know, obviously, at some point, you saw some guy on the internet talking about diabetes and exercise, and you're like, I'm going to talk to him. So, what advice would you give to somebody who was maybe in your shoes before this, who is floundering and thinking, maybe it's just normal to go low and high when I'm exercising? Like, what would you tell someone in that position?
I think there is a lot of information on the internet, and I think it is really hard to distill it down into what's worth taking and like what's worth listening to. And I've spent my fair share of time in Facebook groups and internet forums looking for answers and have never felt secure or certain that these answers were things that I could trust. And I feel like after listening to your process and the level of rigorous experimentation and self-testing you've done and seeing what you're able to achieve and the sports you're able to do, it was very clear that you are the expert on this. And so I think it's like it's worth it's worth working with you because you know what you're talking about and I can trust you. And I don't need to like weed through endless articles on the internet and asking all these random strangers like what to do and doing a lot of trial and error. It's clear that like in some of these big questions, you have very specific answers. Obviously, it's tailored to the person,
Hmm.
but the direction you give is so spot on, even down to like what brand of electrolyte mix has the right amount of carbs in it. And like I could have spent ages on the internet trying to figure that out, but you were just like, this one, like just do that one. And so yeah, I think just like your advice is a much more fast track, surefire way to figure out diabetes with extreme athletics than anything else.
I love that. And I love that we were able to do such a deep dive so quick too. Like the stars just aligned for us to hit. I think it was like 2 days before your race. It was like, okay, where are we at? Let's do this. So I mean,
I could have
kudos.
planned more in advance looking back, but yes, it did work out, luckily.
It did work out, yeah. But I was going to say kudos to you as well for implementing. I mean, I've definitely talked to a few people who are like, "Cool, Matt gave me all the answers, and I'm just going to coast." And it's like, no, 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 you got to do the stuff. You have to implement. So you put the work in. You went and found the products that I recommended. You put the calculations in. You check in your watch 2 hours before. All these things lined up because you put the work in. So I just want to say I'm proud of you for what you were able to accomplish, because that's 100% on you. I might have given you some guidance, but you really just shone in that event, and it's really cool seeing that email come through and you gave me the race day reports. I ran and showed my wife. I was like, look, Rachel did it. Like, this is awesome. So I'm
Thanks so
proud of you.
much.
I want to say that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Excited to
absolutely.
take what I've learned about planning for the extreme events and also try to be more intentional about my day to day. So that's something I'm taking away as well.
Absolutely. That's, believe it or not, something that's helped me as well. Training for a triathlon helped me in a roundabout way to be a better dad. Because I was like, I can handle playtime for 2 hours now. Cool,
Yeah.
let's do it. So
Yeah.
stoked that that's been helpful for you as well. Well, I wanted to give you a chance just in case there's anything we didn't cover. Anything else that you wanted to add in that you felt like belonged in this conversation?
No, I guess my only pro tip that I think I told you about was that dual camelbacks exist if
That's
you are
right.
diabetic and you want water and you want sugar. So they're made in Israel. It's not camelback, but it fits in a camelback pack. So I don't know, just in case that helps anyone who's trying to figure out how to stay hydrated and have something on board for a long athletic feat.
Love that.
Worst case scenario, you can also just put two camelbacks in one holder and do one out of each shoulder. So,
Fair point. Yeah. Just jerry rig it, you'll figure it out.
pretty much.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Well, I just want to say again, proud of you. Congrats on doing so well in that race 2 days after we talked. And I mean, honestly, after one conversation, like you really just took and ran with it. And so, really great job. Happy for you. I know that stories like this are going to inspire people to see what's possible. I was told for years that lows and highs are just part of exercise with diabetes. Nobody told me it was possible. And now you get to be somebody who now shows somebody else that it is possible to perform as an athlete and have stable blood sugars. So, yeah, thanks so much for taking your time today, Rachel, to hop on and share your story. Incredible. And I know that this is going to help a lot of people. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, super cool stuff, right? I wanted to just kind of tag on the end of this one with kind of a recap. So, obviously, Rachel is an implementer. She is someone who takes action. She actually listens to a lot of these podcasts, and so I'm sure she's hearing this one right now, and she watches our YouTube channel. And that's actually where she got her introduction into our world of more formula-driven approach to diabetes management with type 1 diabetes. Now, obviously, what she was able to accomplish is not guaranteed. Not everybody accomplishes that level of success on their first try after a single phone call with me. However, now we know what's possible, right? And so if you didn't know this already, I completed a triathlon sprint a few weeks ago. That was my first one, and it went extremely well. Every single one of my workouts, I was 100% time and range in. So I turned around and said, hey, who wants to learn more about how to do that? She raised her hand, we hopped on a call, and the rest is history, as you're able to see there. Now, what I wanted to share is twofold. One, if you're like Rachel and you're looking for tips and tricks on how to keep blood sugars stable through exercise, but also through other aspects of life with type 1 diabetes, you got to hit the subscribe button right now. I'm going to give you a chance to do that. Just hit subscribe. We put these out every single week. It's going to be a very helpful part of your process in learning how to manage and master type 1 diabetes. Okay, so first step, subscribe. Second step, if you are looking for more of the advanced side, you probably heard Rachel talk a lot about calculations, GTRs, errors, how to predict where blood sugars are going to go. The only way that she is able to do that, and that I do it as well, is through using what's called blood sugar formula. And there's a specific one that we teach in our programs called the 80-20 blood sugar formula. Now, this allows us to predict stable blood sugars. If that's of interest to you, if you want to know more about the advanced side of mastering blood sugars so you can be in complete control when you are competing in events or just living a daily life, trying to enjoy life, go to diabetesinaction.com. The training is going to introduce this new topic, this new revolutionary style of diabetes management, and show you a glimpse of what it might look like to incorporate some of the formula aspects to your diabetes management. So go to diabetesinaction.com right now. Go register for the training. It's completely free. If you like what you see and you want to know how it might fit into your life, there's an opportunity to hop on a call with me or one of my team members at the very end of it as well. So that's going to be a great next step for you if you're interested in dialing in your blood sugars to that level, if you really want the precision that myself and my clients are after as well. So at diabetesinaction.com. Now, as a final note, I have not officially announced this yet, but I will because you made it to the end of the episode, and you're probably one of my favorites, people who are just like me, who are after more specific control over their blood sugars. I decided to do something crazy and officially announce my participation in the next level of triathlete sports. The first one I did was a triathlon sprint. This next one that I registered for, that is 1 month away now, is a full level international distance triathlon. So this is the Olympic distance, essentially. And I will be testing my own limits, as it is insane to think about the training that's going to go into this. And I've given myself, I think, 5 weeks total to completely ramp up all of my training. So if you want to follow that journey, again, hit the subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss out as I go into more detail surrounding the strategies that I'm going to be using. But again, if you want to jump into that world and understand a bit more about what it looks like to manage your diabetes at that high level, especially with activities, exercise, endurance-based sports, go to diabetesinaction.com. Free training, check it out, and I'll see you over there. Outside of that, hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Rachel is a superstar, and she's one of many. And I hope one day that you can enjoy the level of control that we get to experience in these programs as well. So have a great rest of your day. Real quick, crew, I have to add this one in because I was just in communication with Rachel as I was editing this, and she did let me know that initially she was worried, is that a one-time thing? Am I going to be able to keep that up? That was the first race that I was able to use the strategies. She just let me know that for the second race, she was 99% time in range. The only time she went out of range was 3 points out of range. Instead of 180, she was 183. So 99% time in range, still absolutely crushing it and loving life with sports. So if you want to understand more about how Rachel's able to do this great stuff and still live her life, travel while she's competing in endurance-based sports, which is incredibly difficult if you don't know what you're doing, but she's able to conquer it. Again, go check out the training, the same one that she watched actually, at diabetesinaction.com. Check it out. We'll see you next time, and keep up the fight.